Welcome to the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Sue Long-Carrick and I'm passionate about inspiring, motivating, supporting and informing women over 50 to embrace this exciting time of life. Health and wellness in mind, body and spirit are the foundations for living well, but there is so much more to a life well lived. Each week, through conversations with my guests, I'll be presenting topics that will help us all to live well and enjoy life. So join me as we discover new ways to become women living well after 50. Are you ready to start living? What are you waiting for? Let's get started. You'll sink to the bottom of the heap if you give up social media. That's what my guest Lou Hamilton from Silk Studios was told. Lou felt that she was drowning in social media, so she took a sabbatical. And guess what happened? The world didn't end. She found that she was more imaginative with her marketing. She found that she got her life back and also began to own her time. Going back to when Lou turned 50, grieving and empty nesting, she turned to painting and drawing again. And from that came the character half girl, half ninja called Brave New Girl. Brave New Girl became a book, How to Be Fearless, and then another book, Fearless. And then Lou decided to encourage women to share their story and their mission via a podcast. So she started the podcast Brave New Girl, where real life brave new girls could share their story. Not content with helping women for 52 weeks of the year, Lou started Silk Studios, the podcast guest agency, where she helps women to become guests on multiple podcasts so they can share their stories, their mission, and their passion throughout the world. Lou has another book due out in the autumn of 2021 called Dare to Share. And today we're going to be talking about purpose and passion later in life and how they don't have to be the same thing. So let's go and join the conversation. Welcome, Lou. It's lovely to have you join me here in conversation on the Women Living Well After 50 podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is one of my favorite subjects. So I'm really delighted to be here.
Yes, well, I said in the introduction that the topic today we're going to talk about is finding your passion and purpose later in life and how they're not necessarily the same thing. But before we start that, I was reading through some of the notes you sent through to me, and I came across one sentence which I'll read, and it just says that you wanted to come on the show to talk about life after 50 because everything got better for you from 50 onwards. And I have to say that that's what happened to me as well. So I'd love for you to share with the listeners just a little bit of your background and why you felt that 50 was turning 50 and beyond has been just fabulous for you.
Yeah, so in my ancient past, I was I trained as an artist, fine artist. I went to art school and then got into sculpture and sculpture commissions and did an MA in public art, and then got into video, and then sort of through that got into film and documentary. And so while I was raising my children, I was making documentary films. And that was sort of over a period of 20 years. And then I turned 50, and the same year my grandmother died, and I was very, very close with her, and my children were leaving home. And so this kind of hat trick of three kind of major things sort of hit me. And I felt like sort of, as you know, my children were flying the nest, and I was sort of standing on the edge of the nest, looking out and thinking, you know, either I'm looking out over the edge of a cliff, or I'm looking out at possibilities. And we say our children fly the nest, and I was thinking, well, maybe I could fly too. And so this kind of idea was sort of mulling around in my mind. And it was a period when I don't know if it's the same in Australia, but in the UK, suddenly there was a sort of glut of these colouring in books just for meditation. Yes. And someone had given me one, and I thought, well, maybe that'll help me kind of think about what is ahead, and sort of calm my nerves, because I was going through menopause, and I was, feeling very anxious and depressed, and all the kind of usual symptoms of menopause. And so I thought maybe coloring in might help. And as I sat down to start coloring in, I was thinking, I'm an artist, I shouldn't really be coloring in someone else's drawing. And so I got a plain piece of paper and a pencil and started kind of doodling, and out popped this little character, really just, stick arms, stick legs, long hair, no face. And she sort of, I don't know, the first drawing was of her looking up into a tree, and there was this beautiful bird, and the tree was sort of all curly and sort of just sort of very vibrant, and then behind her was this bench of three characters, three sort of figures, all bent over their phones, and so the saying was "look up," and I posted it on social media, and I just had this kind of amazing response straight away, and they would, "Please draw more," and so I kept drawing her, and she became known as Brave New Girl. And after a few months, someone said to me, "Oh, you should try and get it published, these drawings published." And so I approached some agents, got an agent, and then very, very quickly we got a publisher, and the book was published as a gift book. So drawings and sayings, and actually it was published in Australia as well. And so she was sort of out there, and then I wrote, and it was called Brave New Girl: How to Be Fearless, and I guess that was really for me, as this kind of new 50-year-old kind of looking at the future, and for my children as they go out into the world, and this kind of whole idea of being fearless and being brave. And it was at a time when there wasn't much out there around those kind of those topics, and then suddenly there was loads of stuff. But I really sort of wanted to kind of explore that idea of what being brave was, because I had always been very, very fearful, and with the menopause, that sort of anxiety was increasing, and so then I wrote a book, because we write books to kind of explore our own demons often. And so the next book was Fear Less, and so it was really about looking at our fear and trying to use it as an energy to kind of move forward. And as I was doing this, I suddenly kind of felt this surge of creativity. And I was drawing these little black and white drawings on the one hand, and then on the other, I suddenly sort of needed to be painting, and I wanted to be painting in vibrant colors and big. So the scale was it was all completely opposite of Brave New Girl, but it was like Brave New Girl had unleashed the kind of artist in me, and I hadn't painted in donkey's years. And so I just sort of found myself kind of re-finding a passion, but in a completely different way.
Yes. And I think that's what happens to it, isn't it? We have, well, for a lot of women, we have a passion, or we have something, an artistic talent that we have. And then we go through life, and we perhaps either have careers, or we're mothers, or we have both, and it's not until we are empty nesters and we get to this stage of life where we've got that time, but we forget what we did. We forget the person that we were before motherhood and career and so forth. And so it does take time to recapture that, I think. But once you get going, as you've said, it just sort of all started again and started to flow. But fear is another area that many of us feel, because I think that a lot of us have this issue with self-esteem and self-confidence, and also coming to that stage where we've been different people. We've been a mother, we've been a career person, we've been perhaps someone's partner, and that's how we've been identified. And now here we are, and we don't know who we are. So I think that that's a big issue as to why we're fearful of making that step to try new things and to do things. So I think you also likened it to a phase of a caterpillar going through the chrysalis phase and then becoming a butterfly, which is always a lovely analogy.
Yeah, and it really did feel like that because I think because I sort of just kept my mind on that and so I guess I was thinking, as I come through the chrysalis phase, what's going to be next? How can I emerge in my kind of biggest best self? And I think one of the huge benefits of being older is that you start to not care what other people think. And you start to you almost kind of freed of those kind of constraining thoughts that you have when you're younger. So so in terms of painting, when I was younger in art school, I was surrounded by brilliant painters, and so I felt like I'm not such a good painter. I don't really understand color, and so I sort of diverted into much more sort of conceptual work. So I left painting behind, and so when I came back to painting in this sort of new phase, I just thought, you know what, who cares? I'm just going to try and play and just experiment and just not worry about this kind of old belief that I had that I was no good at painting and no good at mixing colors. And when you do things and you keep practicing, you get better. And so the kind of passion emerged as I emerged, and I feel like this sort of that it was like becoming a butterfly, and the paintings are kind of all the colors of my wings.
Beautiful. And the thing is that, we come back all the time to those limiting beliefs, don't we? It's the story we tell ourselves from when we're younger, and we have to really reframe that narrative and tell ourselves that we can do things. So I want you to tell me a little bit about Brave New Girl, the podcast, because from the books you then developed a podcast, Brave New Girl. So tell me how that came about and who your guests are typically.
Yeah, so when I'd done these drawings in the books, and I sort of felt that I wanted her to get out this little character, Brave New Girl. I wanted to get her out further, and so I started putting some of the drawings on T-shirts, and then I sort of remembered back onto my filmmaking days and how much I loved interviewing people and hearing about their stories. And I thought, I can tap into that and maybe find real life brave new girls and interview them. And it was it was the beginning of when I started to kind of, in the UK, we were quite far behind on podcasts. And so it was beginning to sort of enter my consciousness. And I thought, maybe this is the way forward, finding real life brave new girls. And it reminded me of something that I'd done back in, when I was, I don't know, about 30 and pregnant. And I'd created with somebody else a performance, and it was called Silent Voices. And we'd written, this is pre-internet, pre-technology, we'd written postcards to 400 women and women's groups around the country, asking them what they'd been afraid to say and what they would say if they were given the platform to do that. And it was a time when that we have this thing called Reclaim the Streets, where women are afraid for their lives, afraid for their safety. And so this was in the 90s, and it was big then, and sadly is still. And so with all the answers, we projected these two giant video mouths in at the beautiful performance space in London, and out of the mouths came the words of these women. And it was part of a big performance with poetry and dance and singing. And when I was contemplating the idea of the podcast, I sort of remembered that, and I thought, here we are, decades on, we have a technology where I can reach women across the world, and through they can listen. But at the time I was trying to, because I wanted to film it. We did live interviews. So in a beautiful hotel overlooking London, great space, and I would invite somebody, and we'd do an interview, and then we'd have an audience, and so there would be a Q&A afterwards. As you can tell, this was obviously before the pandemic.
Yes, yeah.
And so then the pandemic hit, and we went into lockdown, and I was like, well, what am I going to do now? And I thought, well, let's go remote. And so I learned how to do that, got the equipment, and suddenly, of course, that opens up a whole new world, because not only have you got people listening around the world, you've got the opportunity to interview and talk and have conversations with women all around the world, as you and I are doing right now.
Exactly. On the opposite side of the world, where you're in the
Yeah.
UK and I'm in Australia.
Yeah. And what an amazing thing, opportunity technology has given us to be able to do this. And so, so we have women who mostly sort of entrepreneurs, creatives, campaigners, people who have a message and are trying to, make the world a better place through what they're doing. And so we talk about their story, their purpose, their passion, the lessons they've learned, and the courage that they've found within themselves through their experiences along the way.
And I'll put the link to the podcast in the show notes as well, along with your other links, Lou, so that people can have a listen. And I listen to your podcast as well, so I can highly recommend it. And I love hearing women tell their stories, and that's why I love Women Living Well After 50 podcast, because I've met some very interesting and wonderful women over the time, and it's great to hear their stories. But at the same time, we all have similar, I suppose we all go through similar things in life and experiences as well. So you feel like you're supported, and you're not the only one going through something. So I wanted you to tell me about, we're talking about purpose and passion, and how you feel that they're not necessarily, they don't have to be the same thing. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I was, happily painting away and fulfilling my passion. I really felt kind of filled up by this passion, and it felt like it was feeding me. And on the other hand, I'd created this podcast, and I was giving a platform for women's voices. But I felt, well, I can only interview 52 women a year if I'm doing one a week. But I want to be able to help more women. And so I came up with the idea of creating a podcast guest agency, whereby I can represent women and champion women who have a message that I can really get behind. And they're trying to do something, with purpose and with impact and with meaning, and get them onto other people's podcasts. So I could expand this kind of whole concept of helping women, supporting women. And so really that became my purpose. And I really felt like, the painting was feeding me so that I could feed other women. And they felt very separate in a sense. Except that I then started to think about, my own messaging and my own purpose in terms of, what I'm doing to sort of put out into the world. And, I wrote a book, Dare to Share, which comes out in September, October time. And that was, part of my purpose was to sort of give as many women as the opportunity to get on podcasts as possible, and find a platform for their voice. But I can only represent so many people, and not everybody can afford to be represented by an agency. So that doesn't sit well with me. So I decided to write this book and be able to, give that opportunity for other people to kind of do it themselves. So I gave all the knowledge that I have, but not just about pitching to podcasts, but also about the storytelling and digging deep into your own themes and topics, purpose, passion, pitfalls, the things, the pain points along the way, and the lessons that you've learned. So I really go into everything that I believe anyone needs to know to be able to kind of dare to share their story on podcasts. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking, well, what's my what would my message be? And I've always been sort of health conscious and conscious of sort of doing what I can for helping the planet, but recently, we've become much more conscious of how we're being impacted by climate change. Not least the floods and fires that are happening around the world at the moment, and the kind of sense that we're coming to a point where we've probably got 5 years before we reach our tipping point, and that was becoming quite scary for me, and I was beginning to feel like this kind of rising panic, and from what I've learned about myself and how I deal best with anxiety is to take action. And so I thought, this feels very, very overwhelming and terrifying. And so, I'm going to have to take this right down to little tiny steps and see what I can do in my life that I can help. But then I was kind of faced with the other side of what I do, which is my passion, my painting, and I paint in acrylics, and acrylics are not good for the environment. And so kind of my purpose and passion became sort of almost crashing one against the other. And so I've made it my decision is to try and find ways to create eco-friendly paints that I can paint with, because the subject matter of my paintings are abstract landscapes. So yes, as I was sort of thinking about climate change and sort of the kind of overwhelming feeling of and terrifying feeling of what I can do, I knew that I needed to take some small steps, and whilst I was doing that in sort of my life and work, and I sort of then looked over at my passion, my painting, and I make abstract landscape paintings, and I think very much when I'm painting about our environment and about the physicality of of us all being kind of part and parcel of each other, on a sort of microscopic level. We're all kind of these particles all kind of buzzing around, and so there I am painting these abstract landscapes, and but I'm using acrylic paints, which are incredibly harmful for the environment. And so I made the determination that I would start experimenting with more eco-friendly paints, maybe mixing my own with earth pigments and walnut oil. And so that's kind of my next step, is going to be doing that. I'm in the middle of a big, very, very long commission, and I finished that in October, at the end of October. So after that, I'm going to start my sort of new practice.
Wow. So, yeah, it's wonderful that you've sort of, from 50, things have just started happening, haven't they? And you haven't stopped. You've moved on to something different. And now also what I love is the fact that, with your book, Dare to Share, you're so generous with your information, because you basically just want to help other women to have a voice. And that's just wonderful, because we need more women supporting women, don't we? And helping them to become empowered and to share their stories. And some of them are just, wonderful stories that they have to share. So it's great that you've got that platform for them. So I wanted to ask you, because, you've said that you, like many of us, you want to try something, but then you get a little bit fearful of taking that step, or it becomes overwhelming. So what advice do you give to women who might want to try something, but they're just not able to take that step forward?
Well, I think that thinking about your purpose, your why, what's the, kind of the bigger reason for doing the thing that you want to try? And when you get a really good visualization of that, that kind of gives you the power to get through the kind of the fearful action taking. And I do say, then kind of break it down to the tiniest thing that you can do that's really, really easy, and then do the next thing, and then do the next thing. And then before you know it, you've create, you're well on your way. And what I mean about the creating the vision, or the sort of big picture of your purpose, is something that can really galvanize you and really help you. It's almost bigger than you. And an example of that is, so here I am thinking about, climate crisis and what I can do, and feeling terrified, and it's huge. And I listened to a webinar by some sustainability consultants, and they were talking about how back in time, the indigenous peoples of North America used to gather the tribes every year, no matter whether they were kind of warring, or different languages or different cultures, but they would gather once a year, and they would, because they all believed that they belonged to the land, they knew that they had a responsibility to look after the land. And so that when they were talking about the impact they were having, they were talking about it in terms of, we are responsible for for 7 generations to come.
Mm.
And that was so powerful to me. The idea that you're thinking for 7 generations time, and that kind of, that image of them, I can imagine them, I can see them all sitting around the campfire and thinking so much into the future, and knowing that everything that they do right now will
Well,
impact.
yes.
And so that image for me is what has galvanized me. And so when I'm scared about, how much I need to do to kind of be responsible for the planet, and, my bit, and I think, just look at each little step I'm taking, go around my flat and look at, is this doing harm, or is this okay? What impact in terms of, 7 generations time. So that's what I mean really about creating a picture for yourself, that, it's a single image, but it feels so powerful to you that it really helps you to get through the fear of actually taking action.
Mm.
And I on the other hand also, I do feel that, like I said before, that when we're older, when we're 50 and plus, or, in that kind of area of age, as we sort of get older, we do find that we care less about other people's opinions, and that we do have this kind of, well, almost, I feel like it's a sense of urgency. I don't know how much time I've got left.
Yeah.
So I want to make absolutely the most of it. So I'm just going to go for it now. And while I've got my health and energy, I'm just going to really go for it. And I'm now postmenopausal. Fantastic, thanks to
Yeah.
Marion Stewart and her work. And now I feel like I have this ton of energy, and those symptoms of menopause are kind of now behind me. And I want to use this time. So I really, I think, for women, use the things that we are given in as we age, which, our hormones change, our kind of, our caring nature, which, a nurturing nature, which was sort of part of our younger days, that apparently hormonally that side of us drops away with as our estrogen goes. So in place, we're much more kind of powerful. We're less kind of worrying and wanting to kind of spend all our time kind of looking after people. We're here to go, right, okay, now what's the legacy we want to leave? How do we want to spend the time that we've got left? What can we do with the skills that we've got? How can we help other people? So yeah, I feel like, get your menopause sorted, get, all of those sort of physical and emotional symptoms under your belt, and then use the energy to move forward, and use the energy of fear to do the things and to kind of create a positive impact.
Yeah, and you can. And I think it is important for women to realize that, yes, this is time, and you don't have, like for me, I'm in my mid-60s, and you start to think, well, it's not an infinite time that you're here, so you have to make the most of it, because you just don't know what's going to happen, and just be brave, be brave new girl, get out there and do something that you really want to do, because the only person, I suppose, that's holding you back is yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And your responsibilities maybe are kind of different as you're older, and so you perhaps have more time, perhaps you are kind of higher up in your organization, so you sort of have a bit more sort of say. Maybe you have got your own business, and you're kind of driving that. I think that there's so much to be said for being older, and the power it gives us to really sort of make a positive difference.
Yeah, and to be role models. I think I like to think that, for my grandsons, I'm a role model. And also thinking about what you were saying with the 7 generations, that's very sobering, isn't it? To think that we've got that responsibility, and many people are just not acknowledging that. And the resources that Mother Earth provides may not always be there if we don't start doing the right thing. So it's not just for us, it's for the future generations as well. And when you think about it that way, it does make it much more personal, I think. It was great to chat to Lou today about how passion and purpose are not necessarily the same thing, and her Brave New Girl books and podcast. It does seem that everything did get better for her from 50. So if you've enjoyed the podcast today, I'd love you to share it with friends. I'd love you to leave a comment or a review, which will also help me to spread the word about women living well after 50. That's all we had for this week, and I look forward to you joining me with my next guest in the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. And until next time, remember to live well, enjoy life, and most of all, being a woman living life your way.